On Christmas Day 2013, a father and his 15-year-old son decided to try out some new gear, the presents they'd found under the tree. For their test dive, they picked Eagle's Nest in Florida, a quiet forest pond that divers call the underwater Everest. At the water's edge stands a sign with the image of death on it. Stop. Prevent your death. Darren Spivey had no right to enter this cave, and his son Dylan hadn't been trained at all. Both of them went under the water and never came back up. This is the story of how a harmless-looking pond turns into a trap, and why they were found at different depths, separated by a column of water and darkness. In the woods of Hernando County, in Florida, there's a small pond. It lies among the palmetto and the low trees, maybe 60 meters across, and the water in it is usually clear and calm. From the shore, the place looks completely peaceful. There's no whirlpool, no churning spring, not a single sign that anything unusual is hiding here. Just quiet water in the shade of the forest, the kind you find all over this peninsula. The locals have a second name for the pond too, Lost Sink. Beneath that thin, mirror-smooth surface hides one of the most dangerous underwater cave systems on the planet. It's called Eagle's Nest. What looks from above like a puddle among the bushes opens up below into a labyrinth of enormous chambers and passages, running off into the dark. The main shaft drops away for dozens of meters, and parts of the system reach a depth of around 94 meters. That's roughly 310 feet. At a depth like that, an ordinary person won't survive without special training, without particular gas mixtures, and without years of experience. Just past the entrance, a diver is met by the ballroom, a vast underwater chamber where the walls spread so wide apart that a flashlight can't reach the edges. From here, the system branches on, deeper and lower, into total darkness. There's no sunlight here, no direct way up, only back along your own trail. Eagle's Nest earned its place in the history of underwater exploration a long time ago. One of the people who helped map the system was Sheck Exley, one of the founders of the technical cave diving, and the place has a nickname that says it all, the underwater Everest. Like the real Everest, it demands everything you've got, and it doesn't forgive overconfidence. The rule for getting in is simple and hard. Only certified technical cave divers, people who have completed full training for working inside underwater caves, have the right to go down into Eagle's Nest. For everyone else, going in here isn't an adventure, it's a deadly risk. Right at the water's edge stands a sign. On it is the Grim Reaper, the figure of death with a scythe. In big letters above it, the words read like a verdict. Stop. Prevent your death. And below, one more line that every diver here knows by heart. There's nothing in this cave worth dying for. This sign wasn't put up by officials, and it wasn't put up to scare anyone. It was put there by cave divers themselves and by the training agencies, the people who understand better than anyone what happens here. Behind every line on that sign is somebody's real experience, and more often than not, somebody's death. Since 1981, at least 10 people have died at Eagle's Nest. That isn't some abstract statistic. It's a list of specific divers who went under the water and didn't come back. The reason for those deaths lies in the very nature of the cave. Inside, there's absolute darkness, broken only by the beam of a flashlight. In places the passage is narrow, the floor and walls are coated in a thin layer of silt. Brush it with a fin or a hand, and the water turns instantly into an impenetrable brown cloud. Visibility drops to zero within seconds. A diver who loses his bearings in that murk finds himself trapped under a ceiling of stone, in a place where you can't simply float up to the surface. That's why experienced cave divers lay a guideline behind them, a thin thread leading back to the exit, and carry triple the gas they think they'll need. Without those rules, getting lost inside the system means dying there. Because of one tragedy after another, Eagle's Nest has been closed to open access several times. Today, diving here is allowed again, but under strict conditions. A diver has to hold a full cave certification and to have the right equipment, and the Reaper sign still stands at the water. A last warning to anyone who walks up to the shore of this deceptively calm pond. 2 names are now bound to this place forever. Darren Spivey was 35. He lived in Florida, and he loved diving. Almost always at his side was his son, 15-year-old Dylan Sanchez. Father and boy had a lot in common, and that included a love of the water. Spivey had a fiancée, Holly King. An ordinary family, an ordinary life. A father wanted to share his passion with his son. There's nothing strange about that. Plenty of parents dream of passing on to their kids the things they love themselves: fishing, the sea. For Spivey, diving was one more way to grow closer to Dylan. But there's one detail here that changes everything. Darren Spivey was a certified diver, but only for open water. He had the right to dive in the sea, in a lake, in places where there's open space overhead, and you can always rise to the surface. He did not hold the certification that gives you the right to go into underwater caves. And cave diving and ordinary diving are two fundamentally different disciplines, with a gulf of training lying between them. As for Dylan, the boy had no diving certification whatsoever, not an entry-level open water course, and certainly not any cave training. For him, any serious dive was pure improvisation under his father's watch. The difference between those two worlds isn't a formality, and it isn't bureaucracy. It's measured by whether you have a way up when something goes wrong. And that difference, it seems, was something the father and son underestimated. It was the very thing that separated their ordinary life from what came next. The day in question was no ordinary day. December 25th, 2013. Christmas. The holiday when families come together and exchange gifts. That year, under the tree, there was diving gear, new equipment they couldn't wait to try out. For someone who loves the water, you couldn't ask for anything better. And it's easy to understand not wanting to leave it sitting in a closet, but to take it straight out onto the water. Father and son decided they'd test the new kit that very day. For their trial dive, they chose Eagle's Nest, and here lies the central mistake of the whole story. For a beginner with no certification, and for an adult with no right to enter caves, this is one of the worst spots on the planet. You could break in new gear in a training pool or in calm, open water, somewhere a mistake doesn't cost you your life. The cave forgives nothing. By all appearances, the father and son had something fairly simple in mind: to go down and see the system from the inside. To lay eyes on those enormous chambers people tell legends about. Not a record dive, not a conquering of the depths, just a look. But at Eagle's Nest, even just a look demands the full preparation they didn't have. Working in an enclosed space underwater isn't something you learn in a day. How to behave when there's rock over your head and the visibility is vanishing, how to track your gas usage, how to run a guideline behind you, they didn't have a shred of those skills. That Christmas morning, they drove out to the pond, left the car in the lot, unpacked their new gear, and went under the water. Up above, an empty car remained. From the darkness beneath the surface, they never rose again. At home, Holly King was waiting. Christmas evening was drawing near. Around 3 in the afternoon, she tried to call her fiancé. Darren Spivey didn't answer. At first, that might not have caused alarm. It's easy to forget a phone, and the signal out in nature can be weak. But Spivey stayed silent, and with each attempt, the call went unanswered. On a holiday when a family is supposed to be together, that silence grew more and more unsettling. Father and son had planned to come home, and they still weren't there. Holly decided not to wait. She got in her car and drove out to Eagle's Nest, to the place where she knew Darren and Dylan were meant to be diving. The road through the forest brought her to an unremarkable pond and a small lot beside it. In the lot, she saw her fiancé's car. It was standing where it had been left, empty. There was no gear in it and no one nearby. That meant one thing: father and son were still under the water. Many hours had passed since the time they should have surfaced. For a dive on a recreational air supply, that was impossibly long. Holly King did the only thing left to her. She called the Hernando County Sheriff's Office and reported that 2 divers hadn't returned from Eagle's Nest. Rescuers set out for the pond. But ordinary rescue crews can't work in conditions like these. Going down into a cave, dozens of meters deep, into the dark and the narrow passages, is something only specially trained cave divers can do. While people and equipment were gathering at the site, hope faded with every minute. The pond, which that morning had looked completely harmless, had by evening become the scene of a tragedy, a place from which the dead now had to be brought up. The rescue operation hadn't even begun, and its outcome had already been decided by the depth to which the father and son had gone. What exactly happened underwater during those hours, no one saw. The picture of the father and son's last minutes was reconstructed later, from the data on their instruments, their dive computers and pressure gauges. These devices record depth and gas usage, and from them, investigators were able to trace the rough course of the dive. After they descended, father and son passed through the ballroom, that vast entrance chamber. From there, the system led them deeper and lower, into a branching of passages sinking into the dark. There's no natural light here, and the whole world narrows down to a circle of flashlight. The readings from the instruments were grim. The depth gauges recorded a descent to around 233 feet, about 71 meters. At a depth like that, you already need special gas mixtures instead of ordinary air, years of preparation, careful calculation. For an amateur, it's territory you simply cannot go into. At a depth like that, physics works against a person. The pressure is several times higher than at the surface, and the air from the tanks is used up many times faster than in shallow water. A supply that would last a long dive near the surface burns through here in a matter of minutes. And on top of that, nitrogen under high pressure affects the mind. It's what's called nitrogen narcosis. Perception distorts, reactions slow, judgment becomes unreliable. It gets harder for a person to stay oriented and to correctly calculate how much gas is left. According to the official picture, the pair had no guideline leading them to the exit. In other words, they had no thread, the one thread by which, in the dark, you can find your way back. And the instruments recorded the crucial thing. At a certain point, both of them ran out of gas. The father and son never reached the surface. Somewhere in the darkness, between the enormous chambers and the passages running downward, their dive came to an end, and they could no longer rise. Only certain people can recover the dead from a system like this. To work inside Eagle's Nest, they called in certified cave divers from the rescue team, those who'd completed full training and hold the right to enter underwater caves. An ordinary rescuer is powerless here. You need someone for whom the darkness under a ceiling of stone is a familiar place. The first to be brought up from the depths was the body of Darren Spivey. The father was found inside the cave at a depth of around 67 feet. That's roughly 20 meters below the surface. Not at the bottom of the system, but noticeably higher than the maximum he'd descended to. Which means that at some point, he'd been moving upward toward the exit. For Dylan, they had to go deeper. The second and third rescue divers descended further into the system and found the boy's body at a depth of around 127 feet. About 39 meters. The boy had stayed lower than his father. Father and son were separated vertically by about 20 meters. Behind that difference in depth lie the final minutes of both. It seems they were both trying to rise, but the ascent broke off at different marks. The father made it higher, the son remained lower. What exactly happened between them in the darkness, the instruments can't say. All that's left are those numbers. The recovery itself was difficult and dangerous, even for the rescuers. Every dive into Eagle's Nest is a risk, even for a professional. And here, they had to work under stress, bringing the dead up meter by meter through narrow passages and chambers. By the time the rescuers reached the father and son, there was nothing left to be done for them. Both were gone. The pond that two people had walked up to on Christmas morning gave back their bodies only to other hands, to the ones who knew how to survive in that darkness, and who risked themselves anyway to return the dead to their family. Once the bodies were brought up, the investigation began. The official cause of death turned out to be perfectly clear. Father and son had died underwater, in a cave, from a lack of air. Not a collapse, not an equipment failure as the root cause, but an exhausted gas supply at a depth from which there's no quick way back. The instruments showed that both had gone far deeper than any safe limits for an amateur, and at a depth like that, the supply in standard tanks runs down fast, and calculating it without special training is next to impossible. And once again, it all comes back to the thing the father and son didn't have: cave training. On cave diving courses, they teach hard rules about gas consumption. The main one is what's called the rule of thirds. 1/3 of the supply is spent going into the cave, a second third is always kept for the way back, and the last third stays as an untouched reserve in case of trouble. A simple formula that has saved thousands of lives. Father and son, by all appearances, didn't know it. And there's a second trap. One a beginner doesn't grasp. When the air is running out, in open water, you're saved by a simple dash to the surface. Here, there is no such dash. First, you have to make it back through the whole return route, which is often long and winding. And if, on top of that, the silt has been kicked up and the darkness has swallowed your landmarks, Finding the direction to the exit becomes almost impossible. The investigation, run by the Hernando County Sheriff's Office, took about 4 months. Specialists carefully examined the gear, the instrument readings, and the circumstances. The final conclusion only confirmed the obvious. This had been an unprepared dive into a deadly system, without the necessary certification, without a guideline, without the rules of gas reserve, to a depth that doesn't forgive mistakes like these. The numbers on the instruments came together into a short, clear picture. 2 people went too deep and couldn't come back. After every tragedy like this, the same question comes up. If Eagle's Nest is so dangerous, why do people keep going to it, again and again? The answer lies in what makes this place both alluring and deadly at the same time. It all begins with reputation and beauty. The enormous underwater halls, the crystal clear water, the feeling of stepping into another, otherworldly place. It captivates anyone who's ever seen footage from down there. For experienced technical divers, it's the peak of the craft and a genuine dream. A place they work toward for years, building up experience and qualifications. To do Eagle's Nest by the rules is a point of pride in the community. But for an unprepared person, that same beauty turns into a trap disguised as a quiet pond. From the outside, there's nothing frightening here. No sheer wall, no raging sea, no obvious drop. There's calm water among the trees that you can just walk up to and step into. Everyone who comes to the shore sees the sign with the Grim Reaper, but not everyone takes it literally. For many, it's just a routine warning, like the ones you see hanging everywhere. The absence of any visible barrier creates a cunning, false sense of accessibility. There's no fence, no guard at the water, no physical obstacle, so it seems like you can. And if you can walk up to it, then it seems like you can dive in too. And to this, the human factor is added. Is a holiday mood, shiny new gear, the excitement and the urge to try it out right now. All of it easily outweighs caution. That psychology familiar to so many enthusiasts, this can't happen to me, switches off the inner brake. Danger seems like something that happens to other people, less fortunate ones. It's on this combination, captivating beauty, imagined accessibility, and human overconfidence, that the whole deadly fame of Eagle's Nest rests. The place doesn't lunge at people. It simply waits until someone, underestimating it, steps into the water. And once again, the pond proves stronger than the person who decided the rules weren't written for him. The death of a father and son on Christmas Day didn't stay inside one family. It rippled through the entire diving community and set off a fierce argument that hasn't died down to this day. Opinion split almost down the middle. Some insisted that Eagle's Nest should be closed, or at the very least that a real guard should be posted at the entrance, to physically keep unprepared people away from the water. There was even a petition to restrict diving at the site. The logic was simple. If a place kills time after time, you have to shut off access to it. Others pushed back just as firmly. The problem, they said, isn't the place itself. It's the breaking of the rules. Experienced technical divers stress that the system doesn't kill those who come prepared. Thousands of dives here end safely precisely because people follow the requirements. They hold certification, they run a guideline, they track their gas. Every death at Eagle's Nest, in their words, is the result of going beyond the limits of your own training and equipment, not the ill will of the cave. In their logic, the Reaper sign and the certification requirement exist for exactly these cases. They are the barrier, not a physical one, but an informational one. Whoever completed the training understands the risk. Whoever ignores the warning takes the responsibility onto himself. The story of the father and son became an argument for both sides at once. Those in favor of a ban saw in it proof that signs alone aren't enough. Those against a ban saw proof that the tragedy happened precisely because the rules were broken, not because there were none. And a bitter question ran alongside all of it. Can you even stop a person who's firmly decided to go down? A fence can be walked around. A guard can be waited out. But most often, what came up in these conversations wasn't technique or regulation at all. It was something else. It came around to the responsibility of an adult for a child he'd brought with him into a place where even professionals had died. And to that question, neither side of the argument had an answer. If you strip away the debates over rules and statistics, at the center of the whole story, there remains one decision made by a grown man. Darren Spivey brought his son here to a place where even divers with many years of experience had failed to come back. And he did it without himself having the right, under the certification rules, to enter the cave. He held an open water license, and he didn't hold a Cave 1. He should not have been inside Eagle's Nest alone, let alone with a child. And Dylan trusted his father completely, the way a son is supposed to trust. A 15-year-old boy couldn't have known about the rule of thirds, about nitrogen narcosis, about the guideline and the safe limits of depth. All he knew was that his father was beside him, that they had new gear, and that an adventure lay ahead. He had no reason to doubt. His father said everything would be fine, and that was enough. There was no malice in that decision. There was no recklessness for the sake of adrenaline, no wish to do harm. There was only an underestimation of the danger, the very thing that made a quiet pond seem safer than it is. Spivey, it seems, sincerely believed he could handle it, that he'd show his son a beautiful place and bring him home to the holiday table. But the cave doesn't make allowances, not for a father's love, not for a holiday, not for good intentions, too deep, too long, without a thread to the exit, and it cost both of them their lives. They were found at different depths, separated by nearly 20 meters of water and darkness. That detail weighs heavier than all the numbers in the investigation's report. The father, who led his son, and the son, who followed his father, met the end apart, each at his own point in that cave. That's why the story of Darren and Dylan is remembered not as a report of an incident, but as a warning to everyone who loves the water and wants to share that love with their children. After that Christmas day in 2013, life around the pond went on as before, and in one family an emptiness remained where two people had been. Holly King lost her fiancé and his son in a single evening. The holiday that was meant to bring them together became, forever, a date of loss. Eagle's Nest itself didn't go anywhere. After the investigation and the arguments, it went on taking divers, but, as before, only certified ones, with a full cave qualification. The quiet forest pond stayed open to those who come prepared, and stayed closed, in every meaningful sense, to everyone else. The sign with the Grim Reaper still stands at the water. Stop. Prevent your death. The same words, the same silhouette with the scythe, greet everyone who comes to the shore. But metal and paint are powerless against a person who has already made up his mind. The list of the dead at this pond has only grown longer over the years. As early as October of 2016, 2 more people died here. This time, experienced divers. It's one more reminder that the system spares no one who overestimates his own strength. Every new tragedy brings back the same conversation about bans, guards, regulation, and about where the line runs between freedom and recklessness. The lesson of Eagle's Nest is simple and harsh. Here, everything comes down to preparation, not courage and not luck, but cold calculation, training, and discipline. Where there's preparation, the cave lets a person in and lets him back out again. Where there isn't, a beautiful pond turns into a trap. And so, this pond lives on in the woods of Florida, one of the deadliest spots on the planet, beneath a mirror-smooth surface. And a father and son, who went under the water one Christmas morning and never rose again, are a reminder of something simple. Underwater, a mistake gets no second chance. The price of one wrong decision there is final, and it's paid not only by the one who made it,